Here's a guy who thinks he sees a blueprint for God.
I'm going to show you how to prove God using the standard tools of science. Now, most people think this is a debate about evidence. They think if you just get enough facts, then truth will just be obvious.
If you've established that the data you have is factual, then you already know they're true.
But that is wrong. Data is dumb. A pile of bricks is not a house. To find the truth, you don't need more facts. You need to learn how to build.
What do you think a fact is? Isn't a fact true by definition?
You need the pillars. You need the blueprints. These are the exact same tools that we use to prove black holes and to prove God exists. By the way, I'm Dr. Derek. I have a PhD in philosophy. I used to be an atheist, and this stuff is all I do all day long. All right, let's dive in. Now, before we get into these tools for reasoning, we need to clear up one massive misunderstanding. Some people think that logic or reasoning belongs uniquely to science. It doesn't. Science is just one application of reasoning. These tools, induction, abduction, testimony, and memory, are universal. You can use them to solve a murder mystery.
You mean with forensic science?
You can use them to discover whether your spouse is cheating on you. So when we use these tools to turn to the question of God, we aren't hijacking science. We're simply applying the universal rules of reason to the ultimate question. These tools don't change because the question becomes fundamental. You use the exact same methods to discover the laws of nature as you do to find the ontological source or foundation of the whole cosmos.
Really? You can prove God by empirically testing a falsifiable hypothesis?
To see what I mean, let's start with the first pillar, the one that science relies on the most, induction. If I drop this pin, what will happen? It falls, obviously. But if I drop it again, how do you know it will fall again? You might say gravity, but that's just the name we give to the pattern that we observe. You assume it will fall today because it fell yesterday.
No, I infer that it will fall today because it fell yesterday, and also every other day I've ever seen something fall.
Science is limited to the natural present. It can measure that the pin fell just now, but science cannot physically touch the future.
In a sense, it actually can. Relativity allows events which are in the future from the perspective of some frames of reference to be in the present and therefore observable from other frames of reference.
To say that the laws of physics will be the same tomorrow as they are today requires a leap of faith.
No, it doesn't. Apologists love to try to elevate the epistemic status of faith by conflating it with inductive inference. These are not the same thing, at least not as the Bible defines faith. Hebrews 11:1 says that faith is assurance of what is not seen. Inductive inference is assurance that what has been regularly seen will continue to be seen. Inductive inference is belief based on evidence. Faith is belief without evidence. Any other definition of faith is a non-Christian definition.
We call that induction. But here's the problem. Induction is fragile. The philosopher Bertrand Russell gave us the turkey problem. Imagine a turkey on a farm. Every single day, a man comes out and feeds him. The turkey, using induction, gathers data, let's say 50 days of evidence. And he comes to establish this kind of rule that the man equals food. But on day 51, the logic breaks down. The turkey's model was logically sound in a way, but it was dead wrong. He assumed induction would work every time, but you can't tell the future. And this is the point. Science requires a kind of faith in patterns like induction.
If that counts as faith, then any inference, no matter how well supported, is a leap of faith unless it's apodictically proven like a math equation. That's a much broader definition of faith than the one the Bible gives us. Believing a claim to be true because there is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence for it is not faith.
We also have to assume that the universe is orderly and rational at all just to make the observations and predictions that we do.
Why would we need to assume that the universe is orderly and rational just to make an observation?
And theists and atheists alike, both are standing in this same situation. We both have to trust that the patterns will hold.
No, we don't. We can keep checking whether the patterns are holding. That's why repeatability is a standard in science. The whole point of repeatability is to check rather than merely trust that a pattern is holding.
But patterns only tell us what happens. They don't tell us why it happens. Induction risks predicting the future, but it can't give us an explanation for what happens. For that, we need a tool designed for detectives. We need abduction. And no, I don't mean alien abduction. If the turkey is induction, then the detective is abduction. Imagine walking into a room. There's bloody footprints, there's a body lying on the floor, there's a knife in the back. You didn't see the murder, you have zero direct observation of it, so how do you know who did it? You have to put all the clues together and make an inference that best explains all the evidence. That's abduction.
And you can't coherently, abductively infer the existence of a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind, because that's a self-contradictory notion. Also, you said that inferring the existence of God is not a matter of evidence, but abductive inferences are based on evidence.
In philosophy, we call this inference to the best explanation. You look at all the traces, the effects, and then you try to find the cause that fits all that data. Science relies on this just as much as detectives do. We have never seen a black hole. We've never seen an electron. We've never directly seen dark matter. We only see the effects of gravity pulling the stars. We don't see the... No atheist has a problem with this. It's standard scientific reasoning, of course.
It's more often creationists who have a problem with it. They love to argue that you can't know that evolution happened because you weren't there.
But watch what happens when we point the same exact tool to the universe itself.
Watch what happens when you point the same exact tool to God himself. Apologists will insist that the universe needs a deeper explanation, but that God does not. If God doesn't need a causal explanation, why does the universe?
This is the so-called fine-tuning argument. When we look at all the constants in the universe, gravity, the electromagnetic force, the expansion rate, they are all finely tuned to an incomprehensible precision. You're told that if they differed by 1% of 1%, we'd have no stars, no life, no us.
Ironically, that's only true if there is no God. If there is an all-powerful God, then he would presumably have the power to put planets, stars, and life into a universe with any set of constants. To say that life would be impossible if the parameters of the universe were even slightly different is to say that this allegedly all-powerful God does not have the power to put life into a universe with even slightly different parameters. In fact, I'd be far more tempted to believe that we were put here by a powerful intelligence if the universe were so hostile to life as to make its natural occurrence impossible.
So let's take a step back. What I'm saying here is we have data points. We have what looks like fine precision.
It would only make sense to call the parameters of the universe precise if we had reason to believe that the different parameters we can imagine ever had an opportunity to manifest themselves. We don't. The mere fact that we can imagine different values for these parameters and what the consequences of these different parameters would be in no way constitutes a sufficient reason to believe that the universe could have ended up any other way than it currently is. We know of no way the constants can change or that they have ever been different. That's why they're called constants. If we have no reason to believe that they have ever changed or any idea what could possibly change them, it seems absurd to infer that any other hypothetical parameters ever had any opportunity to manifest themselves.
And the question is, what explains all that data? One option, option A, is just to think of it just as a fluke. It's maybe you'll think of the multiverse theory here, where there are trillions of inaccessible universes that we can't see, and we just happen to be the one lucky winner.
If there happens to be a multiverse in which every conceivable set of parameters is represented in at least one universe, then we're not a lucky winner, we're an inevitable winner. It would be like winning the lottery by having a ticket for every possible permutation of digits that could be drawn. It would be impossible not to win.
Or option B, it was calibrated. There's a mind behind the math. Look, you can disagree with that conclusion. You can prefer the multiverse theory, and we can have arguments about that later. But what you can't do is say that the method is illogical or irrational. It's just using abduction.
Yes, you can say it's illogical because it rests on a baseless assumption and disregards Occam's razor. The simplest inference, and thus the inference which is most probably true, is that the parameters of the universe are not free to vary in the first place. An inference is not automatically rational just because it's abductive.
Atheists and everybody use abduction to find dark matter. Theist philosophers use abduction to find God. It's the exact same tool.
Inferring dark matter from the evidence is rational because it makes no excessive assumptions. Astronomers see a lot more gravity than can be accounted for by visible mass, and since mass is the only thing we know of that can create gravity, we infer that there is some kind of invisible mass. Other explanations, because they would require us to make more assumptions, are not as rational.
Now, if you want to rule out non-physical, non-material explanations right from the start, that's not science, that's materialism. And frankly, that philosophy is dying the death of 1,000 cuts, refuted by dozens of rigorous arguments, even by atheists.
Apologists love to conflate materialism with physicalism. Materialism is the idea that nothing non-material exists, which is silly because time, space, and energy are non-material. Materialism is certainly not science, but physicalism is inseparable from science. Physicalism is the idea that only the physical exists. Physical, as defined by Bertrand Russell, is that which is dealt with by physics. Science therefore has no choice but to rule out non-physical explanations for the universe, because that which is non-physical, by definition, is something which the relevant science cannot deal with.
So let's just assume we're being honest explorers. We have the tools, we just have to admit the trade-off. So, inductive reasoning gives you patterns, abductive reasoning gives you explanations. But notice something uncomfortable. They are both probabilistic. They both lack certainty. Now, I can hear some philosophy majors in the comments typing furiously, "Well, Dr. Derek, isn't logic supposed to be absolute? Like 2 plus 2 just equals 4, but you're calling these probabilistic. Why?" That is deduction. That's the bedrock. Deduction is safe. If you know 2 plus 2, then you know 4. This does give you absolute certainty, but it's also very limited. You haven't learned anything new about the physical world, you're just unpacking what's already in the box.
You are learning something about the physical world because numbers are ideas, and ideas are physical phenomena. And if you're unpacking what's in the box, aren't you learning what's in the box?
Abduction works backwards. It sees the effect. The streets are wet. It takes a risk and explains, therefore it probably rained. It gives science its theories. Because they both take risks, because they're both probable, they both can fail. You might find a black swan. Streets might be wet because of a street cleaner or fire hydrant busting. They deal in confidence and probability, not in absolute proof. But that's the safety. If you want the absolute certainty, stay in the bedrock of mathematics and logic, but you don't really proceed to any new information. It's very limited. But if you want discovery, if you want to find black holes, Big Bang, if you want to find God, you have to leave that bedrock and move to the pillars where things are probable and risky and not certain.
Things are a lot less risky when you can test your inductive and abductive inferences. The greater the corroborating evidence, the greater the chances that your model will hold. The problem with inferring God's existence is that it's not testable, and you therefore can't collect any corroborating evidence. This makes God as a hypothesis epistemically useless, even if he turns out to exist.
Induction gives you the patterns, abduction gives you the explanations. They're both the right and left hands of science. But there's one final glue that holds 99% of your knowledge together, and without it, science creates nothing. You need testimony and memory.
You probably need memory, and science as a collective pursuit would be greatly hampered without testimony, but you don't actually need it. If every person and document were to disappear except for you, you would have no access to anyone's testimony, but you could still do science. You could still formulate hypotheses and test them.
Quick question. Do you believe Antarctica exists? Have you ever been there? Have you ever seen the ice? Probably not. You believe it because you trust the map makers, because you trust the testimony of people who have been there. We like to think that we're free thinkers, rational people who only believe what we see. But 99% of your knowledge, history, geography, where you were born, even all the way down to who your parents are, is entirely based on testimony.
No, it's not entirely based in testimony. Not all records are testimonial. I've never seen a koala with my own eyes, but the videos I've seen of koalas are more than just testimony. I'm trusting the authenticity of the video, but that's more than simply trusting someone's say-so.
It's based on trusting a source. This is that mortar that holds those pillars together. No single scientist has ever recreated every single possible scientific experiment throughout human history. He takes the results on testimony. He sees them in a textbook and he learns them there and takes that on trusting that source. Or he reads the results of certain studies in scientific journal articles. If you remove testimony, if you demand that you must only believe the things that you see with your own eyes, science collapses.
No, it doesn't. It would be severely limited, but it would not altogether collapse.
You're left with nothing but your own limited experience. This brings us to the most hated word in the atheist lexicon: faith. Faith is not believing something without evidence.
According to the Bible, it is. The Bible explicitly defines it as assurance of that which is not seen, that which is not evident.
That's superstition. True faith is trusting in a reliable authority.
So the kind of faith that the Bible describes isn't a true Scotsman, faith.
It is reasonable to trust a map maker. It is reasonable to trust a scientist. And it's reasonable to trust the testimony of the apostles. It's the same cognitive process. So long as the source is reliable, the problem isn't the transmission. The method itself of testimony is sound. Oh, and memory. If testimony is trusting others, memory is trusting yourself. To do science, you have to trust that the same you starting the experiment is the same you finishing the experiment.
No, you don't. You just have to trust that the memories you inherited are reliable. If they are, then it doesn't matter whether they came from the same you or not.
The roof is the goal. It's scientific theory and models. It's the shelter we build out of the facts. But notice something important. The roof, unlike the pillars, is temporary. The roof gets renovated. We used to have a Newton roof for about 300 years. Then Einstein came along, found some leaks, tore it down, gave us a relativity roof. Science is always under construction, swapping out the roof as we get more data. But the pillars and the bedrock, those are permanent. And this is where the skeptic gets confused, because they think that if God is just like a scientific theory, then he's just like a roof that we'll replace next year. We got new data, and so we get a new roof. But God isn't like the roof. God is the architect. He isn't a theory within the universe. He's the reason why there's a universe to theorize about at all.
But as you said before, you're abductively inferring that he's the reason the universe exists, and abductive inference is fallible. The reason scientific theories are constantly revised is because they use induction and abduction. Why is an abductive inference that a god is the cause of the universe any less revisable? I think the explanation for the existence of the universe is that space-time is the basis of existence per se, just as you believe that God is the basis of existence per se. I believe this because I don't understand what it means to say that something exists unless existence means having location in space-time. I deductively, rather than inductively or abductively, infer that nothing can exist independent of space-time, and thus nothing can be causally prior to space-time. You abductively infer that God created all of space and time. I deductively conclude that space and time cannot be caused to exist by anything more fundamental because nothing could coherently be more fundamental. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.